You know how everyone's telling us, like, don't, you just need therapy, like, you're depressed, and it's like, no, we're broke. Because why is everything so inexpensive?
Multiple economists are now warning of a 1929-style market crash. So I figured on top of digging into these economists' claims, we would also listen to President Franklin Roosevelt's speech from 1933 on the Great Depression. What better person to listen to than someone who has actually went through the Great Depression and has led our country out of it? Now, unfortunately, that also ushered a new era of the Federal Reserve bailing out banks whenever there's a banking collapse. Now, time and time again, mom and pop has shouldered the fallout from these banking disasters. And if you're wondering exactly what you can do to create change, then stick around to the end of this video as we discuss a new document on how exactly you can bring change right now. And having said that, welcome back to Real Estate Mindset. You guys already know this video is going to be absolutely bonkers. Now, the way that we're going to begin is we're going to jump right into a speech from President Franklin Roosevelt. Back in 1933, you guys, they didn't have video speeches. So we're going to listen to a radio recording from his speech in 1933 and listen to how he talks to the public. This is history, guys. Absolutely mind-blowing.
That when you deposit money in a bank, the bank does not put the money into a safe deposit vault. It invests your money in many different forms of credit, in bonds, in commercial paper, in mortgages, and in many other kinds of loans. In other words, the bank puts your money to work to keep the wheels of industry and of agriculture turning round. A comparatively small part of the money that you put into the bank is kept in currency, an amount which in normal times is wholly sufficient to cover the cash needs of the average citizen. In other words, the total amount of all the currency in the country is only a comparatively small proportion of the total deposits in all the banks of the country. What then happened during the last few days of February and the first few days of March? Because of undermined confidence on the part of the public, there was a general rush by a large portion of our population to turn bank deposits into currency or gold. A rush so great that the soundest banks couldn't get enough currency to meet the demand. The reason for this was that on the spur of the moment, it was of course impossible to sell perfectly sound assets of a bank and convert them into cash except at panic prices far below their real value. By the afternoon of March 3rd, a week ago last Friday, scarcely a bank in the country was open to do business. Proclamations closing them in whole or in part had been issued by the governors in almost all of the states. It was then that I issued the proclamation providing for the national bank holiday. And this was the first step in the government's reconstruction of our financial and economic fabric. The second step, last Thursday, was the legislation promptly and patriotically passed by the Congress, confirming my proclamation and broadening my powers so that it became possible, in view of the requirement of time, to extend the holiday and lift the ban of that holiday gradually in the days to come. This law also gave authority to develop a program of rehabilitation of our banking facilities. And I want to tell our citizens in every part of the nation that the National Congress, Republicans and Democrats alike, showed by this action a devotion to public welfare and a realization of the emergency and the necessity for speed that it is difficult to match in all our history. The third stage has been the series of regulations permitting the banks to continue their functions to take care of the distribution of food and household necessities and the payment of payroll. This bank holiday, while resulting in many cases in great inconvenience, is affording us the opportunity to supply the currency necessary to meet the situation. Remember that no sound bank is a dollar worse off than it was when it closed its doors last week. Neither is any bank which may turn out not to be in a position for immediate opening. The new law allows the 12 Federal Reserve banks to issue additional currency on good assets, and thus the banks that reopen will be able to meet every legitimate call. The new currency is being sent out by the Bureau of Engraving and Printing in large volume to every part of the country. It is sound currency because it is backed by actual good assets. Another question that you will ask is this: why are all the banks not to be reopened at the same time? The answer is simple, and I know you will understand it. Your government does not intend that the history of the past few years shall be repeated. We do not want and will not have another epidemic of bank failure.
That was from 1933. Did we just hear the first round of bank bailouts? Is that what we just heard? And did it start with the best of intentions, but just unravel out of control? And that's why we're at where we're at right now?
Well, in terms of stacking the history, so the Federal Reserve was created in 1913, and it was designed to provide a flexible and stable monetary system. You can define that any way you want. That's what the thesis was that was sold to the government. Now, that's 1913. In 1929 is when the Great Depression started, and it lasted to 1939. Roosevelt's speech was in 1933. Are you beginning to see the picture here? So we're in the middle of the Great Depression. The Federal Reserve was created a decade before this speech even occurred. And the Federal Reserve was created in 1913 to backstop the banks. Here we are all these years later, 2007 rolls around, the exact same story. In 1913, there were bank runs. 1912, Federal Reserve created, idea, we won't have any more bank runs. This is a thesis or a story that was sold to the government. It was never true. The government didn't have enough intelligence to understand that this was about amortization, cost of capital. And isn't it interesting that in President Roosevelt's speech, we are dedicated to the public welfare. Now, their definition of welfare then is not the definition of welfare today, but take it in context. Permitting the banks to continue to function. Another interesting quote. What did you hear in 2008? Permitting the banks to continue to function. To supply currency to meet the situation. Where did they get the currency? The Federal Reserve. How did they get the currency? They printed it. What happens when you print? Inflation. What happens when you have inflation? All of a sudden you have a liquidity crunch, ergo the Great Depression. Sound currency backed by assets, another interesting quote, okay? Assets are hard assets. What are the hard assets? Real estate and precious metals. What do we have in today's world? Paper chasing paper. Therein lies the problem. The inflation that was created by the Federal Reserve is in fact a hidden tax. And that is what is causing the fact that the Federal Reserve is one of two of the largest purveyors of fraud on the planet, the other being the central appraisal districts.
Let's dig into the 1929 style market crash warnings from multiple economists. A friend calls it the everything bubble. Why do so many economists fear a 1929 style crash? And it's probably because they know without all of the inflation and bailout that's going on behind the scenes, the economy is already in depression. If it was not for that deficit, this has gone some way in fueling the post-war economic boom, notwithstanding the occasional recession, financial crisis, and market correction. By the dozen along the way, the market has, for the most part, proven a trustworthy long-term bet for investors and retirees. Even a global pandemic that unalived more than 1 million Americans proved to be a mere blip for stocks, and that's kind of depressing. And yet the warnings keep coming about the specter of 1929, a time before Securities and Exchange Commission and a Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation existed. Now, speaking to MarketWatch earlier this month, veteran Wall Street analyst Wiffenbarger said that U.S. stocks could be on the verge of the biggest bear market since, you guessed it, the Great Depression. He cited extremely bullish market sentiment, economic weakness, spiraling debt levels, and limited policy tools, which are unlikely to be helped by the uncertain global economic backdrop and the array of tariffs introduced by President Donald Trump. amid redrawing of the post-war political allegiances between the US and Western Europe. I started looking at history and said, and listen to this, guys, it took 25 years for the market to get back to where it was in 1929. 25 years. And he's also saying that any given investment can go down 50 to 90% and stay down for decades, or at least 10 to 20 years. And he's not wrong, but few people live their lives and follow investment strategies with a worst case scenario front and center mindset. Now, this is going over fundamental ratio, where one analyst sees a legitimate AI-fueled rally, another sees familiar folly. Wolfenbarger, incidentally, is not wrong about the recovery period, but it's more complicated than his 25-year observation suggests. After the 1929 market crash, when the stock market eventually lost approximately 90% of its value, and it wasn't until November 23rd of 1954, it took that long for the stock market to rebound. Financial journalist and author Andrew Ross Sorkin offered an absolutely uncertain warning to investors during a recent interview on CBS's 60 Minutes. This is what he's saying: we will have a crash. I just can't tell you when, and I can't tell you how deep. He cited signs of a bubble, greed, and the rolling back of financial regulations as then and now touchstones. It seems impolite not to advise against joining the herd. With that in mind, it seemed apt to check in with Timothy Crack, an economist living in New Zealand, a country with more sheep than people. He described the market as another bullet point in the century-long list of bubbles in asset prices. We all know that humans have an awful history of chasing stock prices so optimistically that they push them past sensible levels. By historical standards, the S&P 500 has been out of line with historical fundamental ratios for a long time. We have slowly gotten to the point where housing prices, gold prices, Bitcoin prices, S&P levels, and even grocery prices seem to have been inflated to levels that are continually grabbing headlines. My secretary and one colleague both asked me yesterday if they should start buying physical gold, and next it's going to be their hairdresser. Retail investors have wide access to online trading. Commissions have fallen. ETFs keep propping up, allowing you to take positions in assets that were previously difficult to access. A friend calls it the everything bubble. Mitch, in what ways is today exactly like 1929?
In 1913, we had the Industrial Revolution, and yet they found the need to create the Federal Reserve. In 2007, the banks had grown so large with massive tentacles, not just in the US, but across the globe. The quote then was, "too big to fail." Well, we don't have an industrial revolution in today's world as compared to what it was in 1913. And President Trump is in the process of trying to bring back a lot of businesses via the tariffs and what have you. AI is not an industrial revolution. Crypto is not an industrial revolution. These are add-ons to progress, what has been accomplished. And in an industrial revolution, what is produced is a necessity in everybody's life. Crypto is not a necessity. And the difference there is that when you have these things that are demanded, what could be demanded in today's world to create an industrial revolution? Potable water would be one thing. An electric grid that doesn't go down would be another thing. These things can be created, and that would be a hard asset. The problem is the financialization that has occurred also is not an industrialization. The financialization, in order to save the US dollar and save the credibility of the American government permanently, means that we have to de-finance. In other words, get the fraud out of the system. That in and of itself could be an industry. Get the fraud out of the system. Create potable water across the United States so that the farms have water from which to feed the plants, from which to feed the humans. All these things can be done, but not until somebody sits down and says, that's it. In order not to have a collapse, we must do these things. We must eliminate the fraud. That's the difference. So is somebody being correct in saying they see the signs? Yeah, unfortunately, the signs are there. Doesn't necessarily mean it has to happen. But in typical fashion, based on what I saw firsthand, 2007 and 2008, and here we are again, it really does make you wonder.
It seemed like what you just said is that things are worse right now than 1929 for multiple reasons: the derivatives market, the hedging market, the leveraged up market, the fraud, greed, corruption, the apathy. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. But they still haven't confirmed a recession, which is always why we keep saying then go to the grocery store and start talking to people. So now I want to listen to 3 different videos of Americans that can't quite seem to make it through the economy.
Y'all, I just went today and got my driver's license renewed, my car tags renewed, picked up 2 prescriptions, and got a few groceries. To say that I'm completely broke now is an understatement. So I'm going to have to go home and start selling off my furniture to be able to live the rest of the month. I mean, that's just, it's unbelievable. No, I'm not going to, that's just a joke. I'm not going to have to sell anything, and I'm thankful to God that I am able to do those things. And my heart hurts today, truly hurts for people who are not able. And we're living in some rough times, really rough times. And we need to be praying for all those around us who are not as fortunate as we are to be able to do the things that we need to do. I'm not talking about extras. I'm not talking about going on vacation and doing fun things. I'm talking about living, taking care of your vehicle if you can even afford a vehicle, putting groceries on the table, buying medicine, the things you have to do. It's sad. It's very sad.
I am currently homeless. How did it happen? Basically, I was living in South Florida for 7 years, and with the insane rising cost of living, I couldn't afford it anymore. And we are talking insane rising cost of living. When I first moved there, I was paying $1,400, $1,500 a month for an over 1,000 square foot, 2-bedroom, 2-bath. And now I was recently just paying $3,000 a month, that's nothing included, for a tiny little 700 square foot 1-1. That's just one of my bills, okay? The insurance skyrocketed. They were actually trying to charge me $800, $750 a month to insure one car. I have no accidents, no claims, no nothing. Obviously, I can't afford that. Many other things skyrocketed as well, and so I was being hit from all angles, and I just couldn't afford it. I also don't have family. I grew up being abused, so I now just moved back to New England, and it actually is more affordable here. But there's also other things, like for example, in Florida, most places require you to make 3 to 4 times the monthly rent. I don't know about you, but I'm not making $10,000 a month, which is $120,000 a year. And most people looking for apartments aren't.
Currently, it's not going to be, it is currently unsustainable. And there are people that they know this, but then they'll still look at somebody else that's struggling and then tell them they're not doing good enough. I want you to imagine somebody that makes $75,000 a year. That's a pretty high up wage in terms of like top earners in this country, $75,000 a year. And we're going to go through some things here. This is a person with no debt outside of a car. And please don't hit me with the, you can go buy a car for, shut up, you can't, shut up, stop saying ridiculous things. An entry level decent car is $30,000. So this person who puts $200 a month into insurance and they pay 5% into their 401k, because shut up, people should be able to put money into their retirement. Because if you're not doing it now, you're never going to get to start doing it later. So after those 2 things come out of their paycheck and their taxes are paid, they bring home $53,850 a year from a $75,000 paycheck. Average rent in my state for a 1-bedroom apartment, because an adult should be able to live by themselves, $1,700. That car payment at 6% for an entry-level, very reasonable sedan, nothing fancy, that car payment's $579 a month. Car insurance, $240 or so a month for a lot of vehicles in this day and age. You're a young person, you've got a nice job, but the insurance companies still want to screw you over. Food, You only cook at home. You never, ever go out. You only cook at home and you only eat decent quality food because a human being should be allowed to eat decent quality food. You pay $879 a month for that. You spend $250 a month in gas. You wear and tear on your car $100 a month. $80 for your phone, $80 for your internet, $175 a month for your electricity, $70 for your water, $20 for your cash. You make 75 grand a year, and outside of a car payment, you have zero debt. Do you know how much money you have left over annually at a $75,000 wage? You do nothing. You don't own a Netflix. You don't go out on a date. You don't pay to go to a park. You don't go watch a movie. You do nothing. If you can't find it on the internet for free, you don't get to do it. If you can't cook it at home for your $800, you don't get to do it. You have $3,700 left over annually. That's like $320 a month.
Mitch, can you give a message to the people that are burnt out right now, that have lost hope and are drowning in debt? And can you talk to them and explain to them how they could start today to change their lives? Can you explain how that's even possible to someone that's drowning in debt and that has lost hope?
One of the reasons why we're doing what we're doing on this channel is to help those see what the future could be, and by virtue of their own education, so as not to repeat the mistakes of the past. That gentleman was absolutely right, but it's actually worse. And on my website is a chart, and it's under the Amicus brief, and it's called Home Affordability. And that lays out the evidence that, over and above what that gentleman was saying, is that roughly across the United States, 9% of a family's gross income goes to real estate tax. These two things are connected. This is the reason why we are pounding the table that the real estate tax must be repealed. End of story. Over and above that, if you want to eliminate hunger, we also have that on the website that explains that the real estate tax eliminated, you can make hunger in the state of Texas go away. With regard to hope, this is also related because if one has the education to understand what is happening to them, that gentleman was right, but he didn't go far enough. If you understand it, then you can sit down and say, just like that lady said, having a car, the groceries, et cetera, I don't have the money, something has to go, or the income has to go up, or you have to leave the area that you are in to find a place that is more suitable where the income allows you to pay for the roof over your head. Well, in that home affordability document is the evidence that, give or take, 37% plus of the household population in the United States is going to go bankrupt and or lose the roof over their head unless something miraculous occurs. This is the math, and this comes all the way back to the beginning of President Roosevelt's speech. The creation of the Federal Reserve itself is what has caused this. When you print money, you cause inflation. And the economic cycles, just like a sine wave, they occur, they peak out, just like they're doing now, and then you get a crash down. If you had the education, let's say 5 years ago, and you knew bad things are coming, or terrible things, or stressful things, depending on your strata in life, and you wanted to avoid it, well, if you had that education and you were networking, and you lost a job, but because you were networking, you had another job, that would give you solace and allow you to go on to something else that wouldn't cause so much stress in your life and your family's life. But over and above that, things can always be worse. And if you worked at a hospital for a day for free, just went to a seniors facility as a volunteer for a day, you can see very quickly how things can be much worse. So yes, there's a storm coming. There has been a storm coming for several years now. At the moment, it's getting a little bit worse. With a little bit of luck, as time progresses, maybe they can level the field out. But I'm afraid that until the fraud is eliminated, this is going to get rocky.
Let's talk to the viewers now about creating a level playing field and about turning the viewers and the citizens into their own storm. So we're going to talk to you guys now about what you can do to create change. Now, you guys hear this all the time. It starts locally. Now, you guys don't have to go out and get elected, although if you do, email us because we want to get that story and we'd be extremely proud of you. But it's never been a more important time than right now to understand how important the local battle is. Without winning local battles, we are doomed to lose every single battle. So what I'm going to do, guys, is I'm going to go over a questionnaire or 2 pages of questions that Mitch has made for you guys to go to your school district board meetings, and you guys stand up to that board and you ask them these questions. And based on their answers, you guys will have the ability to start creating criminal complaints and start exposing the fraud on the local level. Let me show you guys the document. And by the way, you guys, as always, the document is going to be listed for free in the description, and we want to encourage each and every one of you to get a copy and start putting it to work. Questions to be asked by all concerned citizens and property taxpayers at their local school board meeting, wherein the school district raises bonds. Now, this is applicable across Texas and the United States. So again, take this to your school board meeting, and if you can't finish this whole thing, just pass it to someone else, because as you guys know, they give you about 3 minutes. But some really good questions here. Again, stand in front of them and ask these questions. Number 1, how much is the principal bond amount outstanding for the school district as of the date of this meeting? How much is the compound interest on that principal as of the date of the meeting? Because remember, usually the interest exceeds or matches the principal. So if they're asking for 1 billion, they're really asking for 2 billion. Now, who has the list of QSIPs for each and every bond raised from January 1st, 2000 to current? Who has corresponding amortization schedules for each QSIP from January 1st, 2000 to October 1st of 2025? Who has the bond rollover schedule? What proof exists that the Central Appraisal District adhered to USPAP? Who has the school district's balance sheet with proper notes? And to me, that's everything right there. That's what we need. The notes that tie to the values of the total QSIPs outstanding, including the compound cumulative interest paid and to be paid from January 1st to October 1st of 2025. Who has the school district sources and uses for all funding and expenditures from January 1st of 2017 to October of 2025? Where is the evidence that the school district board and superintendent received property tax delinquency report on an annual basis prior to initializing bond raise? How much revenue has been delivered to the school district by the way of a 313 agreement? Big shout out to you, Jeff Mashburn. You are a patriot, sir. Who is responsible for the record keeping of the off-balance sheet financing? What evidence exists that bond fraud and accounting fraud was not committed by the school district board and the superintendent? Did the accounting firm hired by the school district and superintendent perform an audit under the requirements known as generally accepted government auditing standards, known as the Yellow Book? Did the school district run its business for the purposes of obtaining both state and federal funds? The last school district board meeting that we recorded and we played actually on this channel said if we don't raise the taxes by X amount, we will lose that school funding. Think about it. They're spending money so they can get even more. They don't even need to spend the money, but they're doing it to get those state and federal funds. That's a great question. Did any school board member and superintendent examine and approve the amortization schedule for bonds? Where is the general ledger for the I&S debt service money? Where is the general ledger? Really, these are so important. Just give us a ledger and we'll figure everything out. But also the ledger for the O&M. Where is the itemized list of potential bonds that correlate to the request to raise bonds for each year? Where is the check register for each? And this is the number one most important question. We can figure everything out with just this one question being answered. Where is the check register for each check paid out of the school district funds from January 1st of 2017 to October of 2025? Please provide. That is so important. And then this is also going into the due diligence for CAD valuations, making sure that they're accurate. This is all really good stuff. Now it's ending with some really good questions as well about the communications between the school board and the Central Appraisal District, because a lot of people still don't understand that people that are on the school board can also be on the board with the Central Appraisal District. Big time conflict of interest. That's how they're allowing this fraud to continue. If we don't step up and take back over our cities, towns, and wherever we live, then tyrants are going to take it over for us. And in that process, they're going to bury us, you guys, in forever debt. Mitch Vexler, can you go into why you created that forum and any final thoughts?
Over the last couple of weeks, there's been several people that have reached out, including a lady in Richardson that I've been working with, and I've spoken to her about a year and a half ago as well. And then Kayla in Godley, and then another issue came up in Itasca, and 2 other issues came up in other communities, including Taylor, Texas. And it's become clear that as we go through this whole process, we become, and I say we, me included, but everybody that's involved in these videos, we become much clearer and sharper in our attack against those who are violating the law. And they are clearly violating the law. The evidence is on the website, mockingbirdproperties.com/DCAD, and it's a mountain. But the answer to the motion to compel that Travis just read, the reason why that's there is because if you stand in front of a board and you start going through these questions, one person of your group takes, say, 5 questions, another person takes 5, another person takes 5. Well, by the time you're done with 4 or 5 people, the fact of the matter is the board has impaled themselves on their own law. At that point, when you've got this evidence on tape, on video, then you can actually go to an attorney and state at this point, given the evidence that's on mockingbirdproperties.com/DCAD, given the lawsuits that are on the go, given the Supreme Court that is on the go, more than likely this case will be remanded, at which point the sovereign immunity will be stripped. Given these issues, Mr. Attorney, and given the fact that we've got all this evidence lined up, and we even have federal help for federal lawsuits via class action, you, Mr. Attorney, in Timbuktu, Texas, we want you to file a class action. We want you to represent us. And we're in the process of putting all this together. This is an evidence gathering exercise. But think of it this way. The last thing any politician wants to see is 50, 100, 300, 400 people standing at their front door in front of their office demanding answers as to why their property taxes are created on overvaluation and subsequent overtaxation, which then turns into leveraged bonds by the school districts, for which the taxpayers are then being required to cover off those bonds, and their houses are de facto the collateral for those fraudulently created bonds. Start asking the questions, start pushing the buttons, push these people on the boards, answer the questions. And when they can't, that's when you've got them.
And don't forget, you guys, get the questionnaire right now. Go to the description of this video, download it, start passing it out to your friends, and start preparing to show up locally at these ISD meetings. Now, in conclusion, I'm going to tell you guys what's on my heart. And this is more towards if you're a parent and you have children. So in conclusion, here's what I want you guys to do. Again, I'm not a financial advisor, okay? But if you have children and your children say something to you, they want to show you something that they've drawn or anything of that nature, here's what I want you guys to do. I want you to stop. And I want you to give them your time, and I want you to see how just spending a little bit of time with your children uplifts them. And I want you to remember how important you actually are. Now, other than that, guys, if you're out there investing in real estate, you guys already know I wish you luck, and I hope you win.